Hi, and welcome to our video discussion. Today we're going to be discussing the developer's role in the hands-on portions of the application security pipeline, including things like static application security and those things. Hi, my name is Ben Strodzikowski. I am a security consultant with Conducto. Would you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Rami McCarthy. I am a security engineer. I'm a former customer and current advisor to Conducto as well, having worked a lot with the application security lifecycle and a lot with developers. So, sort of excited to talk about the implications there today.
All right, it's nice to have you on, and I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Awesome.
So
Let's
let's
dive
get
in.
started. Uh, so I'd like to hear your opening thoughts on this topic, and then we can kind of go from there and roll into any side topics as we see fit.
Yeah, awesome. I think this conversation of the role of the developer in the security program, if you're thinking about this, I think you're starting from a really strong place. Historically, we've seen security programs struggle when they don't center developers, they don't center our partner teams, and we're fall in the trap of focusing on our own needs and what does the security team want, what does the security team need, sort of spiraling at times into fear, uncertainty, and doubt. When you stop to think about like what's the role of the developer, one thing you're really asking is what are we actually doing here for developers and by extension for our partners in security. And I think this comes up a lot, like a really tactical example you mentioned stack analysis is if we think about the life cycle of a bug, whether that's something that comes out of stack analysis, whether it comes from your vulnerability discovery programs, you have pen testers come in, you have an engineer who notices something looks a little weird and turns out they found something really important. Talking about the different ways a developer can be engaged in and experience that vulnerability discovery uh, is a really meaningful case to me because I think we've probably both seen really bad examples. Like I've definitely was a consultant in a past life, and we worked with a lot of security teams, and you could see going in which ones were really effective because they had the owners of the code bases we were working with in the room and engaged with us. And there were also teams where you would come back in a year and nothing would be fixed. And it's because you file a PDF report and they pass the entire report along to some like line level developer who has to prioritize against all their other work. And they just like never get that developer buy-in, never help developers figure out how important security is. And the failure model goes the opposite way, where if you go to a developer and say, hey, this is a security issue, fix it, and it's something immensely silly. Like if you go look at a bug bounty program, there's a list of probably 25 common, like not really that important security issues or perceived security issues. If you, over the course of a year, send all 25 of those to your developers, tagged high urgency, you're not making your company more secure. You're just making your developers more stressed, and you're not going to accomplish your goals doing that. So I think like maybe this is where we should talk is about the life cycle of a bug. I guess I'd love to hear like, have you seen particularly good or particularly bad examples of those handoffs? Is there color you'd add?
So I've certainly seen the gamut in my time. As you said, I've also been a security consultant for a while now, and I've been embedded with multiple different teams. And you're right, you do kind of get the feel right away on how important this is to each of the different roles that are involved in the bug's life cycle. So it's not just necessarily the developer doing the fixing, but you also have your security team member as well as your product managers or whoever's doing the cadence for the sprints or whatever your release cycle is. And all of that kind of plays into the, how quickly or how efficiently a bug can be fixed, out in production. And so unfortunately, it the is doesn't seem to be a strict standard for how these sort of things should go that works across the board. I mean, this is definitely something that each organization kind of has their own workflow, and I think that's okay. I think that is, you gotta get to where your people are at and hit them where they're running rather than necessarily adding layer upon layer of new security on top of everything. So
Yeah.
I've definitely seen kind of a gamut there. And I think the organizations who kind of are on the right foot are, sharing the responsibility. They have someone in the security side who can be the point of contact. They have a developer who, is assigned to fix certain types of bugs, and they already kind of have that workflow down.
Yeah. In terms of the workflow, I feel like the handoff is really important. And the point, like the handoff point, um, plays really interestingly with this concept of bug triage. So they're not actually coupled. Some security teams will hand off bugs pre-triage, right? Like, here's my scanner cannon, I will point it at my developer's face. Obviously, I have some opinions on that. Other teams will entirely triage and only expose bugs that are of a certain priority pre-shaped to engineers or product managers or engineering management. Like security has a list of 150, or if you're GitHub, 150 million security
Right.
vulnerabilities. They had a recent blog post where I don't know that that's a good like flex number is your number of vulnerabilities, but still interesting to look at that scale. But yeah, security has that list, and only the top 10 that are critical risk get mentioned at all. Or you have 150 million, and developers have full access to review that list and dive for insight, but you still filter down the priority. So I think like the common models are security does the triage or developers do the triage, especially in the legacy mode. If you have like an AppSec team that's engineering minded, they'll take a pass and try and tell you like, is this a P0 or P1, or is it high priority or medium priority, whatever your scale is. Or otherwise, you might just have developers taking these in as bugs in your standard process. And I think they have pros and cons. When AppSec teams run the show on triage, you, in my experience, if your AppSec team is as strong as your developers, which it should be, we don't get a pass just because we're security engineers, we still have to do the engineering. You end up with a higher signal on risk. Fundamentally, no developer, like developers have a hard enough job already. We can't expect them to be risk experts, security experts. We expect them to be sort of tactically functional. They should be like well practiced and well contextualized, but it's job number one for AppSec, and so it gets taken a little more seriously. It's guaranteed priority on triage, and you end up with a higher signal on risk. When you shift that all the way to developers, you end up with this like really high code context and priority context. A developer who does a good job looking at vulnerability can tell you, yes, this vulnerability has, it's cross-site scripting. So if an attacker discovers it, they could attack our users one at a time through an unknown distribution path, right? Like cross-site scripting is a common vulnerability where I think there have only been a couple recent examples of it weaponized in the wild. It's actually like a core OWASP top 10, but you don't see a lot of breaches due to cross-site scripting. And they can compare that to, hey, we need to scale our front end framework so we can support the new product we're launching next quarter, right? And
Mhm.
those trade-offs they have much deeper context on, but they may not understand the depths of deserialization. They may not understand the context of actually we've seen a lot of attacks against this type of issue. And really, at the end of the day, this is all sort of a straw man to have either team be fully responsible, because I think we both would agree the pitch is that it's somewhere you collaborate and
Right.
you like very thoughtfully integrate. One way to start with this is just to adopt a process of suggested versus accepted risk ratings. Like security comes up and proposes, hey, here's a slate of things and how high we think the priority is and how high the risk with a quick blurb. And then the engineering team can ingest that into their process and kick back and say, like, really be empowered to say, hey, I'm not buying it.
Right. Right.
And there's a range. I think if your engineers don't trust you, you're doing a really bad job. If your engineers trust you implicitly and never push back, you're doing an okay job. And if your engineers are willing to challenge you due to their deeper insight and know that you're able to have like a nuanced conversation, I think that's where you really start to get this flywheel empowerment going. Um, so I think
Yeah.
like who does the triage is that example of what's the life cycle of a bug, and more importantly, what's the role of a developer? It's this view that security should be empowering engineers, including to challenge us, not just throwing stuff over the fence and creating a lot of FUD.
Right. And so looking at, kind of the trends in how developers work, move towards a more agile approach, which is, teams that are functional. You have a cross-functional team for a sprint. So you're going to have your security engineers in there helping out. And, that sort of mentality does transfer well to an AppSec program where you can have that collaborative effort. And it's not just the developers in there fixing bugs or, the AppSec people jumping up and screaming and saying, "Hey, you got to fix these bugs." You're taking an approach where you have ownership on both sides. You have some knowledge that you're sharing between these worlds, and you're making sure that everything is, moving along according to how the business runs that risk calculations.
Yeah. Do you have any like quick proposal on how you get there, right? Like I'm a new AppSec engineer. Let's say my company has 100 engineers, right? Sizable engineering program. I'm the first application security person. It's not a massive company that's never cared about security. It's just a company that's never been big enough to have AppSec. Like, how do you get to that point where a developer is part of the agile process, assuming it's not a company where this is like a top-down mandate? Hi, here's your security engineer. You must include them in your agile ceremonies because we are agile capital A.
Right. So I think the important thing here is the conversation. I think the connection between multiple humans who are actually doing this work is kind of the key portion here. The technical aspects, sure, they need to be taken care of and everything like that. But honestly, if you're not communicating those needs and the priorities, then you're not you're not really coming to the table with everything that you got. So I think it's important for an AppSec engineer in a case like that to reach out to the lead developers to get that dialogue started. Talk about their pain points as things exist today, even before adding new layers on top of it. I mean, if you're adding more oversight and more, stops in the pipelines and the process, then you got to have some sort of justification for it. So you start with what are we doing today? How can we tweak things to make them more secure? And that's really a conversation. That's not a mandate from the application security team that says, no critical bugs in production or what have you. It's more of a, hey, let's figure out how long would it take to fix this critical bug. Let's put an SLA of, 7 days on it or something along those lines. And I think that's more of a conversational tone. It's less of a, you have to do this, which I think oftentimes in the security industry, we kind of get painted with that light, the Department of No kind of thing. And I think we need to move toward the Department of Possibility or the Department of Maybe, I guess, as the better term there. So what are your thoughts?
There are a lot of interesting points I could tie into there. I think you mentioned like meeting with lead developers, and when we talk about security communicating, I think it's important to have almost a pyramid where you're doing one-to-one communication, right? Which is very expensive. It
Mhm.
takes 30 minutes of each person's time, and two people have been involved. Then you do groups, and then you do broadcast. And so this is where like putting a face to security scales, is finding out where you need to have those one-to-one conversations. For example, a specific team that's high risk, like a team that's managing your authentication and authorization logic, where you should do groups. So this is another approach that I like is office hours, like security being an open door program can be really powerful because it lets developers drive conversations with security as opposed to security always being the initiator. And then broadcast is as simple as I feel like security teams should always have a role in onboarding. Security teams need to get in front of developers day one and say, like, we are not the amorphous counterparty of your past experience if you've had a negative one. Like, we are engineers working with you on solutions, and we think about it as a collaboration. And I think just putting words to that is really powerful, and putting a face, a direct contact in case of questions. I personally, for a while, was the person running the onboarding, the face of security onboarding. And that is not because I am the most senior person on our team or the person best suited to answer your questions or anything. It's luck of the draw. But anyone can reach out to me, and has, because I'm the one person they like have had any interaction with on security. And this really removes impedance to sharing, allows direct reach out on questions, gives a point of context or contact when you have one of those like security things that you don't want to bring up to the group, like, hey, this is my first time getting a phishing email at this company. What's that look like? Like
Right.
maybe your past companies, it was don't you dare click that link. Maybe you're supposed to send it to security. Maybe you're supposed to just ignore it, send it to spam. It can be really hard to like put yourself out there, or even, my laptop's doing something weird. I saw something weird in our logs is a common one. Really giving people an outlet involves personalizing security. But you can't, your security to engineer ratio. Common topic in the industry. I've heard 1 to 50, 1 to 100, 1 to 150, depending on the company. If you have that sort of ratio, you have to find ways to humanize and relate and standardize without necessarily meeting every single engineer that may ever need something from you, or vice versa. And scaling culture then is almost as important as scaling the technical processes. Because we started this with triage and bug lifecycle. Similarly, you scale that by having a standardized interface. Like, you want to solve this technically. We want to automate as much as we can of pulling in additional signals, additional historic context. We want to contextualize the bugs in our infrastructure. Are they reachable? Are they on internet exposed services? Is this an internal tool? We want to know who to talk to about them. And so scaling that technically and then scaling the culture come together, where you do this handoff that has really rich technical context that was easy for you to acquire, and really rich relationships where everyone's on the same team. And I think that's, honestly, it's really hard, and that's what it takes to get out of the whole security programs have dug themselves by being really bad partners in many cases, in many places. And I think we all have times when we're not showing up as much as we want to for the developers we work with. And it's really important that we, like, in the fullness of time, converge on a really productive, healthy relationship.
Yeah, and so I was reflecting on some of my time as a developer in the past, and when these sorts of things happen, so early 2000s, suddenly there's a mandate from above that says you got to do some security testing, right? And then we get handed Excel files with very minimal data from some tool that we don't get to run ourselves to check whether this is still a good issue, those sorts of things. And just the kind of disconnect that was felt, and you kind of feel like you're put out on an island. You're on Dev Island, right? You can't really, the boats come in once a week and you get new Excel spreadsheets every time, right? And so I really do see the opposite, where things can fail because you're not having that conversation.
Yeah. The Dev Island thing is funny because another thing I like to touch on is that it's classic feedback you'll get as an engineer, as a professional, around bringing solutions, which is like, especially in security, we have this problem spotting skill. Like, it's a core utility of our role is our ability to see problems coming. But if you have a team of 20 engineers, all of whom are spotting problems coming and shouting upwards, right? It's just noise. And so you have to be able to sort of cut through that and find solutions at every level at your scope. And so even if you have a very waterfall organization where it is this periodic delivery, periodic check-in, you can still improve that by shipping solutions, shipping paved roads, killing bug classes. Sure, you're bringing an Excel spreadsheet to the team, but every week when you check in, it's, hey, by the way, cross-site scripting isn't on here anymore because we moved everyone to React, or we changed all of our XML parsing libraries to disable DTDs, and now you don't have to worry about these line items. Like, figuring out where you can give to get is really important. And I think that's all about paved roads and killing bug classes, because security programs can be hamster wheels. If you show up and you say, well, we've done 10% of the Excel spreadsheet for you, great, the sheet's going to get longer. You are going to keep doing 10% over and over and over. And you're still going to have one security engineer for every 100 developers, or what have you. So there is this like balance of shipping solutions, but making sure they're ones that scale and kill bug classes versus ones that are just toil moved from developers to security. You want to feel enough of the pains that you help, but you can't overload anyone to the point that they can't be working on the like compounding scalable efforts.
So, and I think some of the modern tooling can actually help us to kind of bridge that gap. So, in the past, we've had just scattered tools, things that are running either open source or paid for, or a combination of both. And you get that output, and it's hard to mesh it all together, then figure out, okay, what do we do first? So looking at things like application security posture management, we can finally get a look at the vulnerabilities that are in our entire ecosystem and prioritize on that based on the business risks rather than just what the tool is telling us is the risk. And we can also augment that with other data, which helps us to bring that context, like you spoke about, whether it's internal company data that can be shared about, say, XSS, frameworks or anything like that, or it could be real life data like EPSS data that kind of tells you whether this is being exploited in the wild, whether you can easily find the exploit in the wild, those sorts of things. And I feel like that modern tooling is laying that groundwork, like you said, paved roads to kind of give us those conversations inherently and be able to pass the responsibility around with that full context.
Yeah. I think a question I'm often asking from tools like that, and that I need a single source of truth for, is how do I describe my program upward, especially around vulnerability management or posture? Historically, security's relied a lot on output metrics, like we fixed 10 bugs or there are 100 bugs, but that's not good. There are a lot of really great like security metrics blogs and books you can read, and I recommend doing so. Metrics are important. Not all metrics are created equal, but really you want outcome metrics. You want metrics that say like what in the world has changed because we did this work. And so using a single pane of glass, which it's security, I'm going to have 5 or 6 single panes of glass, but picking a source of truth for the state of my vulnerability management, and then being able to communicate upwards that a few core metrics that are important. For example, one I like to use in vulnerability management is bugs out of SLA. It's a really interesting one because it implies you have triage. You're triaging effectively. You're centralizing your data. You have an SLA, and you have a way to hold teams accountable for their role in meeting SLA. But for leadership, this is really like when you go upwards, you can ask for a few things. More people, right? Like I'm asking management for money. I'm asking management for time and attention of theirs on priority. I'm asking management to yell at someone, not yelling actually, but to talk to teams about the priority. You can't ask management for much else. Like that's the role of management, is to deliver those things and support and mentor and grow, but from a governance perspective. And so with a metric like bugs out of SLA, why is that useful to communicate upward? Because what can management do? They can look at bugs are going increasingly out of SLA, and they can pull levers that they have in front of them, which is pretty rare with some of these metrics. Like, what lever does a manager pull for number of bugs? Hard. Right. Bugs out of SLA. Okay, now we add color. It's a Minto pyramid of sharing. Like, that's the top line. Are we having more bugs? Are they higher severity? What teams are they coming out of? Adding all this context and color so that leadership can pull levers like, oh, we need to devote more time to paying down tech debt. These bugs are happening in legacy systems. Or we need to emphasize the importance of these SLAs compared to other priorities for teams. SLAs are getting blown. That probably means teams either aren't set up to succeed or aren't taking them seriously. Let's fix those incentives. So I think like having a couple top line metrics you talk about for program health is huge. And security is getting more data driven. You need this data. You need clean data, you need rich data, right? EPSS is huge right now. You do not want to wait for every one of your tools to independently support EPSS. You do not want to wait for CISA's KEV, right? Like known exploit vulnerabilities. You don't want to try and correlate that yourself. Figuring out a central place to do that is important. ASPM is an answer. I have done this before with just my ticket management system.
Right.
This is a problem that's undifferentiated in security, and it is one that I'm increasingly tired of solving for across a disparate set of tools, right? Like there's a reason that I was a customer of Conductos and then got involved, is because I do really think that security engineers spend too much time pushing around vulnerabilities from a project management perspective, and they should spend more time like actioning them, whether that's triage, whether that's fixing them, whether that's shipping paved roads. So the more we can do there to measure, talk about our successes, get the right incentives in place, and empower developers to be more secure, I think the better off we are.
All right, so we are nearing the end of our time here. I want to thank you for coming on, and I think we had a good discussion. Definitely going to have you on in the future so that we can pick apart some more topics here. Would you like to leave us with any final thoughts or final words?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I feel like I could talk about working with developers for a very long time. We've taken on a lot of tech debt in our relationship with developers, and there's a lot to debug and a lot I've gotten to see coworkers do so well, or had developers teach me about how to work together. I think my takeaway, my closing thought is like culture eats strategy for breakfast is a sort of pithy saying, but I think everything we're talking about implies picking a very specific culture and approach to security. And so there's this whole other problem, and maybe it's something we'll talk about at a different time, about making your security culture understandable to new hires during the hiring process, to new engineers, just like we talked about with onboarding, security coming in the room and saying, hey, you may not be used to hearing this, but security's here to help and we're here to work together. One approach I took was defining public values. It was a big thing at Cedar where I was working. So we actually have a blog post with the security values. And the values really were a means to tell the organization exactly these things in a repeatable way and tied to the work we were doing. The values were things like explain why with empathy, make it simple to be secure, but also security is everyone's responsibility. And I think thinking about how your team does work, you can't steal my values. Every company I'm at, my overlap of like my personal values and approach to security and how the organization works is important. What you want to do is find like the most coherent way to talk about this developer-centric approach that gives folks a cheat sheet for knowing that we're going to be successful working together. So I'd just say that like, if you try and tactically apply a few of these things, a single pane of glass, doing security orientation, one-on-ones with developers, and you're not getting the uptick, like one, step back, look at how you're thinking about security, figure out if you can tie a common thread. Is everyone in the team on board? And then take a second to talk to the organization about how you want to do security, especially if it's not always been the same or you have some relationship debt. Do a reset, say, hey, we've thought about this a lot, and we're taking a really new for us approach to security that is developer-centric and empathetic and automated, and we need your help to do it, right? Security needs engineers. Hopefully engineers need security. I think we haven't always made that obvious, and so we can do more there.
True. True. So
Awesome.
thank you very much for the discussion today, and I think that's it for us.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.